welcome to the Pulse Collective podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the PCP, otherwise known as the Pulse Collective podcast. I'm your host, Sharuk Ansari. For those of you just watching or just joining the family today, we are Pulse Collective. We are an AI growth agency that helps partner with businesses all across the country to help them multiply their revenue and also unlock their potential through AI-powered systems. We've had people who help with lead generation, just sales enablement, just take your team to the next level. So if you do feel like that's something that you're looking for to take your business to that next level, drop us a message down below and I'll have one of our consultants reach out to you to see if it could be a potential fit for us to work together. Now, for today's episode, I'm really excited because I'm actually joined by somebody who's at a company that I haven't worked for directly, but it's definitely in the area of expertise that I've personally experienced myself. I'm joined by Matthew Tharp, who is the CEO over at Hunter, which is actually a platform that's used by over 5 million professionals at this point. It helps them find verified email addresses and power personalized outreach at scale. So if you're in sales, this is right up your alley. This is exactly what we want to talk about today. Matthew brings a unique perspective to the sales tech space. He had started his career in sales before actually building and now leading multiple startups as well, including a company that was later acquired by Optimizely, I believe, if I'm saying that correctly.
Yep. Yeah.
But yeah, Matthew, welcome to the show, man. I'm really excited to have you on. Can you kick us off by sharing a bit about your background and also what Hunter is all about?
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. I didn't know you called it PCP as a nickname. I think that's hysterical. Love that. That's great. No, it's great to be here. Yeah, as you said, I've been doing this for long enough that I've earned most of the grays in the beard. About 20 years building SaaS companies, and most of it's been in the sales and marketing tech space. I think largely I've just enjoyed trying to bring the latest capabilities that technology can offer to smaller teams, smaller businesses, and try to make things more accessible for small businesses to help grow. It's been kind of a focal point of all of my career. It's not purely small business focused, but I think one of the things I've enjoyed is that if you can build a tool that's really effective at adoption for small businesses, look, that's ultimately what everybody wants. They want simple tools that do things very well, that make the answers of what to do clear. And they just want it to keep being as simple as possible. And so for me, optimizing for small business user types has always ultimately led to some of the best products. I'm proud to say that the first product I ever was a part of, the first company, the first startup I was a part of, that product, as far as I know, is still actually in use today. We grew it, we bootstrapped it, we got it to, it was profitable from early days. We sold that to LogMeIn. That operated as a phenomenal tool in LogMeIn's portfolio. And then that ultimately got sold to another company in the call center space that ran their sort of enterprise call center tech for a while. And so to be able to build something from 2003, 2004 to now that's still actually functional and in production is a pretty rare feat in software. And so, yeah, then to be able to start something new at Zeus and build something that has ultimately become the CDP underpinning Optimizely, again, I think it's a great signal of achievement that the right product and the right technology in certain people's hands can be really powerful. And so, yeah, I've just enjoyed doing this. And Hunter, for me, as you mentioned, I started in sales. When we were starting Zeus, I was actually trying to find ways to get our first customers and to figure out our kind of early growth motion. And Hunter was one of those first tools that I used. I actually remember installing the browser extension, and I just had to show everybody around me. I was like, guys, you've got to look at this. And so to be able to have that come full circle and to be a part of Hunter now and leading the team has been a phenomenal opportunity. And it's a great product. It has a great affinity with people in the market. Like almost anybody who's come up in sales and marketing in the last 10 years has probably either has heard of it or has used Hunter. And to update your metric, by the way, as of the end of last year, we passed 6 million subscribers worldwide.
Wow.
And so, yeah, it's a pretty amazing accomplishment. We added over 1 million subscribers last year. There's not very many B2B companies that get to operate at this scale. And so that's another just kind of, I don't know, gift, honestly, that I'm pretty blessed to have gotten to be able to be put in this organization.
Congratulations, man. That's actually
Yeah.
pretty tough.
It's great. It's great. Yeah, last year was a phenomenal year for us. This year, I expect to be better based on everything that we've done. Anyway, it's a good time to be alive in some respects.
Yeah, no, honestly, I was really looking forward to this conversation with you specifically because, I've spoken to people in different walks of the IT space, and we talked to SaaS founders who are specifically looking at like ways to improve efficiency. But for sales guys like me, I spent like a handful, like a majority of the last decade at least, like just doing enterprise sales. And I think for a lot of us, what I find cool about your story is you used the tool earlier on in your career and it came full circle for you. And a lot of us the same way. So like you'll start off using a lot of big name tools out there. So we're actually going to get a little specific because I know people that may be watching this, they've used the Apollos, the ZoomInfos, they've used a lot of these types of tools and they're familiar with them. For a tool like Hunter, like how do you think about the positioning that goes into your space on the market? And you don't want to just turn it into like a feature war that like, this is what we do, this is what they can't do. So how do you really position yourself uniquely to kind of set yourself apart?
Yeah, it's a great challenging question because the core use case is the same, right? Whether you're an individual contributor or you're building up a marketing agency and you're focusing on lead gen, or you're an enterprise sales rep, the job to be done is the same. I've got to find the right companies. I've got to find the right people within those companies to try to find as many of those organizations as I can. And then I have to get through to their eyeballs, right? Like I need to get in front of them in a way that can start a conversation. And, advertising isn't always good at that. Many of the marketing channels are higher, they're higher up in the funnel. And there's very few channels that have become this proven that are really as effective as cold outreach can be for driving conversations. And so it's the goal is to continue to do the things that make that job to be done as easy as possible for anybody that wants to use it. One of the cool things when you have 6 million customers is that your ICP is really broad, and that's both good and bad. And so if you look at Apollo, so to take a couple of the cases that you exampled, so like we all know like ZoomInfo is very much sales driven. They're very much enterprise focused. They're the 500 or 800-pound gorilla in the space. At the same time, if you look at any market where there's a massive gorilla in the space, there's always going to be opportunities for products to be less complicated, for products to do the basics really, really well and make those easy to do. And more important to us than any of that is to not gatekeep it. We wanted to make it as accessible as possible. And I think that begins to kind of articulate our differentiated position in the market. We've done everything. And I think, honestly, in some cases, may have slowed growth at times to try to make sure what we're building is an on ramp into the product and the functionality that gets value to people as quickly as possible. And that means having a free product so anybody can try it without barriers, having that first interval from free into paid be accessible, right? Like if it goes from free to $1,000, that's not super accessible, right? So we wanted a sort of a way to on-ramp people in ways that remove friction for them. So it didn't have to be sales driven. And like our approach to it, I would say, is like kind of the antithesis of what ZoomInfo is trying to do. That's not to criticize it. It's just they do that. They've owned that space. So we want to try to find the place that they're less effective. Apollo, as the other example that you cited, when they came out, raised a ton of money and really focused on leveraging that capital to get a foothold in the sales mindshare, right? Like they really invested aggressively in sales teams and trying to build their product out for sales teams. And I think they invested a ton in features. And that starts to get to be, I think, to your other question about like, how do you keep it from being a feature war? Well, you've got somebody at the top who makes tons of profit and they can reinvest that profit accordingly. You've got another company that's raised ungodly sums of money that they can deploy on this. And so where do we fit in that? And I think for me, those are both really good examples of they've gotten really focused. They've really, really built the tooling around those key personas. And in the case of something like a ZoomInfo, if you've ever worked with enterprises, as you have, it's like 50% core, 50% edge case.
Yeah.
And when you get into like smaller organizations, it's like 80% or 90% core. And so for me, it was okay, if there are going to be companies focusing entirely on sales teams and companies focusing entirely on enterprise, who does that leave? And the reality is, if I talk to somebody in PR or recruiting or financial services or tech sales, like they're all customers. I spoke to a photojournalist and found out he was a customer. So it's like everywhere I go, it's proof that our insistence on trying to make the whole capability as accessible as possible is working, because those folks aren't thinking about themselves as sales teams. They're not operating in that space. They're not looking for tools like that. They're looking for things that simplify that process. And so balancing, how do we deliver that value to the market? How do we fill that gap while also not limiting customers, right? Because that's one of the trade-offs that you
Right.
often make if you try to simplify things. A lot of times what happens is you're removing capabilities. I've always been able to strike that balance in every company I've ever been a part of. I think we've been really effective at that in my career. And I just keep trying to learn how to make that better and better over time. And so bringing that to Hunter was a really exciting opportunity.
I mean, getting all the way up to 6 million customers at this point shows that you guys are obviously doing something right. So that's
Yeah.
probably the best metric that you can leverage. I think one thing you really touched on, which a lot of us will resonate with, is as a former I've worked around a bit. I spent a couple years over at Microsoft, spent a couple years over at IBM, and a lot of those types of companies are very like embedded into these, you want to say, like the gorillas of that marketing
Hmm.
of that space. So they've invested in ZoomInfo intensively for an extended period of time. Actually, after I left IBM, I worked at a smaller IT company. They're kind of like Gartner, which is like a research firm. But essentially, what they do is they actually are more invested into these smaller players. Not necessarily calling Hunter a smaller player, but compared to, of course, like some of these bigger guys. And I've noticed that I'm noticing a lot of these small to medium sized companies that are scaling up to these like big players in the space. They're actually looking at that access to entry as the biggest point. So I like the fact that you actually touched on that, because once I actually started this business that we're operating now, the biggest obstacle I thought, as an IBM employee, I had no idea how expensive ZoomInfo was. I just thought that was part of my everyday life. So when I actually reached out to the sales rep and I was like, hey, like I need to get a couple of licenses for my team here, I was left in shock when I heard like what they're starting at.
Right.
I was like, man, like there has to be something better. So it's cool to see how you guys have kind of bridged that. I wanna get a little bit more tactical with this though. When you're talking about just, your sales journey, I want to kind of step back a little bit from you today. But when you were an account executive, account manager, and you were kind of in that role, what were those few things that you felt were the biggest struggles in you being able to do your job effectively and more efficiently that has kind of led you to build Hunter into the product that it is today, to maybe solve that for people that are in sales gigs today? Because I know being in a role is the best way to actually build a product because you've actually gone
Yeah.
through it. So what would you
Yeah.
say were those things that kind of stood out to you?
Well, I mean, anybody who's at any phase of their career had to live and die by picking up the phone understands that that's a hard job. Yeah. I mean, that's labor. And it's different, right? Like when I started, oof, I don't want to admit that. Let me figure out a way to frame how long I've been doing this that doesn't make me feel so bad. No, like I remember, the first time I started doing a sales role, and information asymmetry was a problem then. Like if you wanted to actually figure out who to contact at a company, that wasn't easy. You tended to need to network. Sometimes you would just call into a company blind and start like trying to find ways to get people to tell you who you needed to talk to. There wasn't a technical component to that to make it simple. And in a lot of cases, it was all manual documentation. So like, I'm not going to get into the whole CRM thing. That's a totally different world now than it used to be. It's amazing, actually. But that's what I think fascinated me, is that, look, every single business that ever exists is going to have to try to figure out how to grow itself and how to find new customers. And so whether there's AI or there isn't AI, it doesn't matter. It's been the same in my entire career ever since I was probably working back in high school. If you have the ability to give people the most targeted information about who their prospects are and just shorten the gap between, okay, I have a service or a product that I need to sell, and being able to talk to somebody, that's the key. You want to remove as much of that space in both time and effort as possible. And so for me, that has always guided my career and my decisions and what kind of companies I wanted to be a part of. It was like, can I see this being put into people's hands in a way that helps them grow their business without them feeling like they're beholden to some other agency or something else? And I'm not against agencies, but if you've been in a small business or you've been a sales rep and you've been held back because you're waiting on somebody else, I just think like those are the kinds of things that used to frustrate me. I want to go at my own speed. And I think great salespeople, people who love their role, figure out a way that works for them. And it's not always the same, right? Great sales organizations that I've seen tend to have really good, solid processes, but they're not so prescriptive that you can't find your own method. You can't find a way to optimize for your strengths. The worst sales organizations are the ones that are trying to do all the thinking for you and are trying to be too rigid. And so I've always tried to build tools that create less information asymmetry for sales reps. Bring them as much information that's actionable as possible, put it in their hands, and make it really easy to take that action. It's different between having actionable information and then actually being able to do something with it. And not a product plug, but recently we released a feature called a sort of TAM calculator. And so if you've ever raised money or tried to build a product or even just validated an idea, it often starts with a really hard challenge, which is, how big is this opportunity to begin with?
Right.
But what we did with Hunter is, I'm like, okay, great, let's release this TAM calculator, because once you've done your TAM calculation, you can actually just save that TAM as a list and then begin prospecting against it in minutes. And so we've taken a process that used to be really opaque, really well guarded, and pretty challenging, and we've made it now something you can do in, like, from zero, from blank page to an actionable list in like 3 minutes.
And for people, sorry, that don't know what TAM is, I know
Thank
total.
you.
Yeah, just like you want to reiterate what that means.
Yeah, total addressable market. So whenever you're trying to see how big an opportunity is, there's kind of two ways to do it. One way is top down. You just sort of get an estimate about how much you think there's already kind of generally being spent or how much budget is available in a market. The bottoms up, though, is really figuring out how many companies actually match the profile of your user, of your potential user. And if you start to play with how much you think you should sell your service for, that gives you a clear indication of like, what is your total addressable market size, both in terms of number of companies and in revenue opportunity. And so, like, first off, everybody who's in a go-to-market position or is a founder or is even thinking about a side project should be doing this activity. And it's a good example of something that used to be really challenging that now is like literally a landing page on our website. Like, it's really great. That's a good example of the kind of thing that I'm talking about, just trying to make things as accessible as possible that at some point in my career, literally I couldn't even do. And I think that's the shift for me. It's always been about trying to put tools in the hands of people that are often held out of markets or are limited or relegated to like lesser products. And it's about trying to really bring some sophistication to users like that, because I think when you do that, everybody wins.
100%. 100%. I think you touched on a lot of cool points. Like, I've personally been in those exact sales spaces where, you're talking about everybody had to be on the phones. You're picking up, say, 100 calls a day. You haven't done any research on these people that you're calling. You've just been given like a list. And that was kind of the biggest struggle that I personally experienced in my early ages. Was you just have to call people and kind of just sound like a telemarketer, which was my biggest thing. I hated that I had to go through that phase because I hated when I would get telemarketing calls myself. So I was like, why do I need to be that person? So I think the biggest change that I've noticed from even a lot of those enterprise teams, you'd be surprised, like they're still kind of stuck in those ways because of course, like for teams that have been doing that for 50, 100 years, like it's hard for them to make that change. So I've still had to deal with, even as recently as a couple of years ago, teams where, if you're not making those calls, even if they're converting at a certain rate, like the metrics, it's more of a volume game as opposed to an actual dialed in type of approach. And I'm curious about your kind of take. Now, if we step back and just look at the industry as a whole, because ever since COVID, I've personally noticed a big difference, and I'm sure you've probably seen that as well, where the market and the way that people are actually looking to be reached out to has changed quite a bit. And for example, I'll give you an example a little bit more specifically where emails, when you're actually sending emails out to people, inbox providers have also become a lot more smart. So in the ways that they actually flag email inboxes, people are getting flagged a lot quicker than they were previously. So there's a lot of things that you now have to do to make sure that, you're warming up those inboxes properly, like the domains aren't getting flagged and how you're actually doing that, especially now with AI being embedded directly into platforms like Gmail as well. They're starting to really look at those things and make sure that those aren't happening. So I'm curious about somebody like you, like your approach to that. And what are your thoughts on like how the rules of outbound are kind of changing? And is there a specific methodology, whether that's still picking up the phones is like you think that's still the most effective? Like what's your take on what the best approach is and also how you see the rules evolving as well?
Yeah, let me try to split that. So let's talk about what I think. So philosophically, I'm like you. I don't answer calls. Like I don't answer cold calls. If I don't know the number, the chances are if I answer that, it's going to keep me from doing the thing I'm actually supposed to be doing right now. And so it's not giving me a choice. And that to me, like my choice is binary. It's either don't answer it or answer it. And the reality is it's I don't find it effective. Like first off, I don't have the time for it. If you're calling me out of the blue, I find that to be I get you that that's your job. I find it disrespectful. And I don't find it disrespectful because it's your job. I just find that I have always felt this way. It's not really aligned with a respect for your buyer. Because a
Right.
respect for your buyer acknowledges that they don't have the time to pick up the phone and then sit there and listen to some random yahoo telling them this thing that probably isn't even a priority for them right now. And I don't
Yep.
care how much intent data you have, you can almost never properly predict the timing. And so there are a few truths that I think have always been there. But what we've seen over the last few years, and I think the ramp up before and after COVID, turned into an exercise in how much can we scale this. Outreach became almost like a challenge or a game of, hey, but what if we scale it up twice as much? How will the numbers hold? And I think the good and the bad is it really proved out that this is a channel that can be effective. The downside is I think it also burned a lot of goodwill and it created a lot of pattern match for spam filters. And so
Yep.
to your point, inboxes have gotten much better about flagging this, partly because the focus for too many years in a row was on scaling, and it was not, it
Volume.
was quantity over quality. And if you go in Reddit, if you look on LinkedIn, if you join some of these Slack communities, you'd hear like one person would say something about what was effective. And if you actually look at what they were telling you, they were telling you that a focus on quality over quantity was really what made the difference. And then somehow that gets translated and extrapolated into like, oh, well, then we just need to take that, copy and paste it, and then ramp it up to 100x. And then the numbers will go a bit down, but we'll still get a bunch of booked meetings. It became easier to automate garbage,
Yep.
which is inevitably going to trigger a response, which is how do we get rid of more of the garbage? So what I think has happened is like over the last few years, what changed is that that exercise happened and now we're on the other side of it. And I think what everybody understands is that pattern no longer should work. It no longer is going to work. There are more and more challenges that are going to be brought to make that less effective. And so knowing that, what is the right answer? And what we're seeing in the numbers is actually really clearly articulating what the right answer is. And it is a quality over quantity approach. If people optimize, so this is some of the hard data. I've got a metric here that I think is like it's super telling
Yeah.
about what the behavior needs to be. And that is that smaller segments for lists, for outreach, outperform just substantially, 125% outperform bigger lists. So
Wow.
if your list is 50 or fewer people, you're likely to have a 2x impact on your conversion rate, on your reply rate, than if you have lists that are 100 and above. So it's dramatic what happens when you keep lists smaller, when you personalize. Like, all of the data says that you want small segments. You want to limit the number of emails you're sending to people. You want to only target 1 or 2 people per company. You want to personalize the subject lines and personalize the body as much as you can, but not too much. There is a diminishing return. I
Right.
think it's something like 4 or 5 personalization variables in the body is great, but if you go too much farther than that, it ends up breaking down really fast and you see the numbers drop off. So, like, the data is telling us that this channel performs better when you focus on quality over quantity. So then the question becomes, how do we still make this a doable task? Because we can't all just sit there and manually write emails all day long. We still have to have the research component. So, like, the thing that I think is becoming really clear is, yes, there was a change. Yes, that change, I think, in a lot of ways proved out the industry and also burned some of that goodwill in the process. So it's a little more challenging today than it was 5 years ago. But at the same time, we now know way more than we did. We know how to optimize this channel. And so if you're willing to do the work, and this is, I think, the real message, if you're willing to do the work, you will see the results.
Right.
And if any salesperson listening to me say that is going to realize that that's 100% true about everything in sales. If you're going to do the work, you're going to see the payoff. And whether it's outreach by phone or outreach by email, that is true. I like email because I think it's more respectful. I think it allows things to be on the buyer's terms and not just the salesperson's terms.
Yep.
I think it creates a brand impression when the timing is not correct. And the one nice thing about AI is, you're right, it's gotten better about filtering out pitches or labeling pitches. But the other thing that it's much better at is actually finding concepts in your email. And so the ability for the foreseeable future, the ability for one of your prospects to go, wait a minute, somebody emailed me about that. And I remember I didn't delete that, or maybe I did delete it. Who cares? But, like, who was it that asked me, who was pitching this to me? And so, like, the ability to use AI to actually get better recall on touch points that you've had previously is going to improve.
Yeah.
And so if you leverage that knowledge, you're going to be able to deliver a better result for yourself, and you're going to be able to connect with other people. And I think people have mistaken scale for hard work. And to some degree, we're human. Like, we're always doing that. We're always trying to figure out how do we make our lives easier. And I get that, but there are certain things you can't skimp on. And I think that's really what the data has revealed. And look, when I worked at my first startup, we figured out that the real power of that tool was making it something that helped you connect with customers in a sales conversation, not a support conversation.
Yep.
Turning chat from a support-only tool into a sales tool was a massive game changer for us. And it also showed me the power of using data to educate people and inform people. And because when you put a chat rep in 3 conversations, they have the ability to be so much better educated on how to answer any customer's questions than somebody on the phone can. It's slower, it takes longer, you have less visibility, you don't have like a track of all the URLs they've clicked on. And so, like, taking the data, acknowledging the problems and the challenges that people who are trying to solve these problems are facing, and then giving them tools to make those key pieces easier, that tends to be a pattern that always ends up generating a good product. And so I'm just trying to do that again for sales reps, because I think we all have to do that sales role if we're going to build our companies. And I don't care if you're a founder or a CEO or a sales rep or in your marketing, everybody should be selling. And so the goal is, how do we make that something that's as scalable and repeatable, but at high quality as possible? Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
No, that's literally like right nail on the head. Like, I personally think the biggest thing, first of all, I think the fact that you have that hard data, I feel like everybody has a hunch that that's the direction that people need to head in, but you don't actually know until you know. But the biggest thing that I've actually seen is, I completely agree, first of all, with your calling approach. Like, I personally, early on, I thought that was going to be the easiest way. You just spam out 100, 200 calls a day, and, like, you'll get lucky. You might get one person that's not going to tell you to F off on the phone, and, like, you can, like, build your business that way. But eventually it got to a point where I actually think AI and, like, tools like Hunter, actually, like, tools like what you guys are now bringing to the market, have changed the game for a sales rep. So if you were a sales rep, even like 20 years before my time, I used to talk to my old VPs at these enterprises, and they used to tell me like they used to have their phones out. They used to be having like the yellow pages, like while they were driving their cars around, like going from business to business, like basically just on the phones. And I used to think that was crazy. So I'm like, now at our time, like we're lucky we have these tools that are available to us to like make our lives a lot easier. Personalization is no longer an option. I think if there is a key takeaway that we take away from this conversation, it's that you can get the whole concept of I actually don't buy into the entire, like, excuse my language, but the BS of like marketing being a numbers game anymore. I think previously, like people thought you could just spam a volume game and eventually I'm sure there's some type of results that come from it, but your personalization is no longer excusable. That's why tools like if you're familiar with Clay, if you're familiar with like the GPT through OpenAI, like they've come out and the reason they've been popping as much as they are is they make it a lot easier for you to do that. Really, really interested with like just one thing with AI specifically now. If we had to talk about how this is now going to change, I've seen it change sales completely in just the last 5 years. But now, 5 years from now, we're looking at 2030 your product specifically, I'm sure you guys have a forecast of how you want it to look 5 years from now, or maybe some things that you want to incorporate. But how do you see AI changing sales teams specifically? And I'll give you a very key example. For us specifically, what I've actually noticed is we could get really high quality leads from our marketing and we will get conversions and they'll be fully qualified and they'll hop on sales calls. But now the conversion rate I was noticing from those sales calls to actually getting a follow-up meeting or like actually getting a closed deal, it would fall off a tank. So I'm like, this can't just be our leads that are coming in. Like at a certain point, you have to look at your sales process as well. And I kind of looked back and I stepped back and I was like, we need to analyze what we're doing wrong in our sales calls specifically. And that's where sales enablement actually became a tool and it became powered by AI. So now a lot of people, I'm sure you have this too, like your sales team will probably record their sales calls. Like people have Loom, people have Zoom, they have whatever tool they're using. It records it and it pulls a transcript of that sales call. But now what AI is actually able to do is you can take that transcript, upload it into like say like a sales call analyzer. And after every call, you not only get notes and like a summary of your call, but you'll actually get exact objections that you faced on that call with pain points and how you should have actually answered them. And now AI has gotten so advanced. There's actually a tool I saw on Instagram scrolling the other day. It was called Objectionly, I believe. And now what it's actually doing is you can have a live sales coach on the sales call with you, which your client can't see. But if they give you a price objection, the sales coach is actually messaging you in the chat telling you this is a price objection, this is what you should say. So it's kind of like constantly evolving. So I'm curious now from your perspective, I'm noticing a trend towards leaner SDR teams. People
Mhm.
aren't really trying to have like a 50, 100-person SDR team anymore because you have AI tools to help with that. Do you see the direction that the market is heading into as optimization and opportunity, or do you see it as risk? Because I'm really curious what you see that as.
So let me give you a somewhat abstracted example before getting into the specifics for a second. So the very beginning of my career, something I noticed was if you only picked up the phone, you would lose deals to people who showed up in person. If you showed up in person, you could still lose deals to people who understood the customer's business better and had a better solution to the problem. If you then apply that same, so what happens is like in every major phase of like building businesses, the go-to-market has always been focused on how do we scale things and what's going to actually differentiate outcomes. We've gotten really good over the years at scaling things. And what always ends up happening is the people who are willing to do the things outside of that scale, who are willing to focus more on optimizing for quality, get differentiated results. And so if you think about that in terms of advertising, if you think about that in terms of SEO, if you think about that in terms of cold calling, I remember early on, it often drove me nuts that I had to call somebody more than 5 times or 10 times. But it was also true that it was the 11th or 12th or 15th call that actually sometimes made the difference. And and so if you take those examples over time and you try to just translate those to modern technology, and you can see this with email, and then you can apply the same idea to AI. What we learned with email is that, yes, this is an effective thing, and yes, it can scale. But at a certain point, the thing that actually creates differentiated results is not focusing as much on scale. And so the pattern for email isn't actually any different than any other phase of go-to-market. It's the same pattern continues. Lots of people focus on how much they can push growth, how much volume they can drive, and the differentiated players tend to focus more on the quality outcomes. And so if you think about that with AI, if we know that that pattern is true, what do we think AI is going to do? Well, it's going to speed up what we can do with technology. It's going to make the technology capable of being more lifelike. It's probably going to do things humans are bad at, like it can make infinite calls, right? Like it doesn't get bothered. It doesn't care if it makes 40 calls. And I got bothered by 5. AI can call infinitely. It doesn't care, right?
Yep.
It's going to get better and better at faking voice. It's going to get better and better at faking the email writing. So what's going to happen? It's going to prove AI is going to be effective at hyperscaling go-to-market again using this new set of tools.
Yep.
And then what's ultimately going to drive differentiated results? The people who figure out either maybe I should show up in person, or maybe I need to have a better pitch, or maybe I'm using these tools more effectively at not scaling, but actually trying to figure out how to optimize results each step of the way. And so what's going to happen is, just once again, we're going to find that people are going to continue to focus on using those tools. And what's going to end up happening is people are emotional animals. They buy due to trust or fear. They are going to go with either the thing they trust the most or the thing that is the safest, the thing that gives them less fear. Bigger organizations, more fear, more at stake. Smaller organizations, less risk averse, willing to try things. These patterns have been consistent for at least the 30 years I've been observing them, and I can't imagine they're going to change because of AI. What's going to change is all the stuff in the middle that AI is able to do and how well people are at harnessing that. But at the end of the day, people like to buy from people. And I've always thought, because look, I'm a big believer in free products and freemium. I think freemium is an amazing motion, but I can also tell you there are limitations to freemium. Because what's happening is that freemium is really good at allowing people to opt in and buy on their terms, but it's really bad about shaping those terms. A salesperson, a sales process can make sure that that buyer actually gets the big picture, actually understands everything that's possible. And one of the biggest consistent ongoing challenges with software is that users are only scratching the surface of its capabilities.
Yep.
And that often one of the leading drivers of churn is people going to another product to do a thing that they could have done in the product they already had.
Yep.
So when you look at these truths, these are consistent patterns, and it doesn't matter what technology is a part of it. These things always reoccur. I don't think that's going to be any different with AI. And yeah, like AI is going to make the technical parts of this process easier, but it's not going to change the human behavior aspect of it when it comes to what is going to differentiate if I get 1,000 emails for really well written by AI and one email written by a human being that stands out because it's kind of clearly human. And I don't need misspellings on purpose and all of that garbage. That doesn't trick anybody anymore. But like, think about it. Provide a thoughtful solution. And at the end of the day, nobody cares if it's AI.
Yeah.
Nobody really does. If it can solve the problem and it's efficient and it listens, nobody cares. But right now, humans are better at that job.
100%.
And I don't know that that's going to change much, because I don't know. It just feels like there is a certain element of humanity that just hasn't yet left us. And I think that's still a big part of the trust development process that, yeah, I think we should rely on. We should pause here for a second and you can clip this out.
Yeah.
My dog is starting to get irritating in the background. I'm
No,
gonna kick him out
all
fast.
good, all good.
Go on. Sorry. I know AirPods are really good about clipping some of that stuff,
I
but you
actually
never
didn't
know.
hear anything.
Great. Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, listen, Matt, like I know we're coming up towards our end of our time here. So I want to ask you a couple of questions really quick. Looking one question more towards your future focus. And then I'm going to have 3 rapid fire questions I'm going to throw your way. That's going to be
All right.
not just business related. We've had enough business talk for today, but I really want to look at like just looking into the future. If you woke up tomorrow and you were like, hey, I'm Harry Potter today. I have a magic wand in my hand and I want to fix one of these challenges that are happening in Outbound today. I feel like for you, You kind of touched on it, that human approach when it comes to personalization, like you could kind of like key in on that. But I want to hear from you. Like, what would that one challenge in Outbound be that you could fix if that was in your power?
You know, it's the challenge that I think we've prioritized at Hunter right now. So like I'm happy to say we are actively working on the thing that I think is the biggest problem. And I think the biggest problem is the data. If you think I like to try to think of like what is the first barrier or what is the first sort of weak place in the chain? And if you think about everything that comes in outreach, it all comes after the data. Everything you're doing is predicated on having a good set of data to begin with. And that's true if it's, look, if you are, look, there are industries where cold calling still makes a lot of sense. And that's fine. I'm not saying it like doesn't work for anybody, but at the end of the day, it's still only as good as the data that you have. And so LinkedIn by itself is not enough. It's not enough of a data source by itself. There are tons of industries that really don't participate in LinkedIn, that are not really active on LinkedIn. It just doesn't do anything for that ecosystem. There's data, there's industries that are fairly opaque, and there's just not a lot of data accessible. And so I think one of the biggest challenges in this space is like, how do we try to solve the data problem in a way that can actually make the very first part of the process more effective? Because then everything else afterward is going to be better. And
Right.
so to me, I think the job to be done is the same. Just make it as easy as possible. And as long as you're doing all of that on top of really good data, look, maybe they want to integrate with Clay. Maybe they want something simple. Maybe they want to, like, there's maybe they want more phone calls. Maybe they want no phone calls. What really matters at the end of the day is your success is going to be predicated on the quality of the data to begin. And
Yep.
so I think if I could wave a magic wand tomorrow, that would be the thing that I would instantaneously solve. And I don't mean getting past any privacy boundaries. I don't mean that. Like, I think the privacy boundaries are important. But it'd be really good if you wanted to get into the manufacturing space in a particular niche like medical manufacturing, that you could actually find all the right decision makers in that industry, knowing that their job is to find opportunities to improve their business. They need to hear from you, right? And so if we could continue to do a better job of making that data more available and more transparent, then I think everything else just gets easier.
Completely agree. I completely agree with that data issue, especially like I think data companies nowadays are data has become the new currency. I feel like when it comes to you actually trying to scale anything, like if all of your decisions have to be made on that. I'm personally very excited about AI. I am a little biased because literally it's 90% of what we do, but I do feel like that is going to unlock a lot of these data um like gaps that a lot of people are still experiencing. It's just going to make it easier for everyone. Now, out of respect for our time, I want to quickly throw three quick questions at you and really
Let's
see
do
what
it.
your take on that is.
How are we going to score this, by the way? How do I know if I've won?
Oh, we'll see. We'll see at the end of it. I'll let you know. I'll let you know.
Okay.
I have a mental scorecard in my mind, but
Okay.
two of them are going to be a little business, and then I have two that are going to be non-business related. So, uh, now, what's one belief that you have that you had about startups early in your career that you've completely changed your mind?
That you can't succeed unless you raise a tremendous amount of capital.
What's more fun for you, building something absolutely from scratch or scaling something that you know already works?
That's tough. I like them both. And they're both rewarding in different ways. You know, they both require creativity and hard work. And I just like doing that. So I guess if I had to bias in one direction, it would probably be towards starting from scratch.
Okay. Okay. Now, you as a person, Matt, if you weren't building tech companies, like what would you be doing right now?
Well, I'd be hungry. But other than that, uh, you know what? Honestly, the things I like to do with my time, I like to get out in communities. I like to take photos. I really am passionate about art, and pretty much every artistic discipline is a fascination of mine. And so I would like to say that I would be doing something creative, something artistic. If I didn't have to worry about feeding myself, that's 100% the right answer.
You're gonna be like the next Picasso on the side. Like he's actually like gonna be painting and it'd be pretty cool. I think the last one we have right now, man, is like if you had to give one piece of advice to your 20-year-old self, you had to do all this over again, your entire career all over again. The young man watching this interview right now, what's that one piece of advice you'd give them?
The simplest version is you're right. Keep going. I think when we're young, we're either naively confident or we're naively underconfident. And I think the challenge is like we just all of us have our journey that we have to go on where we figure out where we're right and where we're wrong and sort of improve our pattern match on what we think works and what we think is good and who we really are. And I think those beliefs are kind of the thing. But I would say the real answer to this, there's a saying that I heard. I can't attribute it to anybody. I don't know how to attribute it to somebody. I don't know who it came from, but I know it was probably the thing that I wished I had written down at a young age, because I 100% believe it. And it is that how you think creates how you feel, and how you feel becomes an emotion. An emotion becomes vibration, and a vibration becomes a magnet, attracting what you want and repelling what you don't.
Wow. Wow. That's game right there. If you guys are watching this, make sure you take notes, because like that is something, especially for a lot of entrepreneurs, you go through that lonely phase of your journey and your mental game is really what's going to stick out. I've experienced that. Like, I'm sure everybody that's going to be seeing this has experienced it at some point. You're going to go through lulls where months go by. You feel like there's no direction. You don't know what to do next. Like, you've spent a certain amount of money. Like, there's been no results at all. And nobody around you really gets it. So, having and like really perfecting that mental game. And I actually tell my own guys too, like, don't make your business your life. Like, I think the way you do one thing in your life is actually the way you do everything in your life. So if you're actually taking care of yourself, I tell them, like, I don't need everybody to have a six pack on my team. Like, there's people like that, you know what I mean? Like, but if you live a healthy lifestyle, like, you're fueling yourself the right way, you're at least going out, go on walks, like, just take care of yourself. You're going to be in a better mental state to help take care of our clients as well, as opposed to you just sitting there and not taking care of yourself. And, like, things just add up over time. That compounding weight that you're putting on yourself, that ends up actually revealing in the work that you put out as well. So I personally think physically, and you touched on it, the emotional and mental part, they all play a role into how you feel and how you carry your work every day. So, Matt, listen, I appreciate your time today, man. Like, this was honestly a really, really fun conversation. This touches right at home for me, being a guy from sales. And I'm wishing you nothing but the best. I know you guys are at 6 million. I'm hoping next year when I get you on the podcast, I'm hearing something like 8 or 9, and you
It
guys
needs to
are
be 8. Yeah, exactly.
you guys are constantly getting up there, and that hopefully we have a bigger audience at that point as well, the one that we're building. So love to have you back on and kind of get an update on how both of us are doing. So I appreciate your time, and I'm wishing you all the best with everything moving forward.
Thanks, man. Listen, I appreciate the thoughtful questions, and you're really taking a very conscientious approach to figuring all of this out and sharing really good content that isn't just you know, meme worthy. It's actually trying to deliver valuable information and thoughts to people. So love it. Thanks for having me on. It was a great conversation. I'm glad to be here.
I appreciate that. Appreciate that a lot. Thanks a lot, man. Take care.
Good luck, man. Cheers.